In the late 1940s, a group of people saw or claimed to have seen something extraordinary. We shall use our most critical faculties in the determination of whether these claims are true or likely to be true. At 10 p.m. on July the 3rd, 1947, in Roswell, New Mexico, Dan Wilmot and his wife watched from their front porch for about 50 seconds as they saw something traveling somewhere about 1,500 feet off the ground at a speed of roughly 500 miles per hour. Wilmot said they saw a flying disc, which looked like two wash balls placed together, glowing from the inside. In search of caught up with Wilmot's offspring in 1980.
The case began when Roswell businessman Dan Wilmot witnessed an amazing object over the town. His son tells the story.
This was their home in July of 1947, and it was one summer evening. They were sitting out here. Dad looked up in the west and saw an object that came down and had lights blinking, and it was rather frightening to him, but he said all of a sudden it seemed to rock a little bit and sort of counterbalanced itself, wiggle a little bit, and then seemed to settle down and take off at a rapid rate of speed.
Of particular importance to Roswell is Jesse Marcel Sr., a military intelligence officer of some high regard who is said to have seen and held unearthly artifacts. Let's hear from the man himself.
They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed or told the newspapers, the newsmen, what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon, of course, which we both knew differently.
Major Marcel had to keep silent because of his strategic position at that time. He was in charge of all security and intelligence on atomic tests in the United States and the Pacific. Marcel retraced his secret recovery operation across the hot New Mexico desert.
We left Roswell perhaps around 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As you can see, it's flat. It is very difficult. In fact, with just verbal directions, we never would have found it. We had to follow the rancher out there.
The crash site was so remote, it took an entire day to drive there.
The following morning, we went out to the site where the crash was. And what I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, loaded in a wagon. We filled that up. It took us a good part of the day to do that, because it was such small fragments that we had to do a lot of picking. We found a piece of metal about a 1.5 to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off of it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of. Because being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not be. It could.
Hey, you guys, this is Professor Vitt, and let's cover this Roswell assignment. Now, two things you need to make sure that you have in front of you. One is the Roswell assignment right here, and then the second thing is the Roswell reading packet. Essentially, you're going to read this packet, and then you're going to do what's asked of you in the first packet. But don't start with the second packet because it's extremely lengthy and you're not going to know where you need to go. This is 34 pages of text. That's a lot. You need to focus your efforts on where you need to be looking. So start with packet 1, and let's hit the dynamite things here first. Number 1. It's due July the 18th, 2016, before midnight. Turn it in on Moodle. Don't email it. It's going to be about 4 to 5 pages long. I don't care if it's 3 3/4 of a page. I don't care if it's 6 pages. Don't sweat the small stuff on the page requirement. It's just so that you know oh, this is a required, say, I don't need to write a 40-page paper, I need to write a 4-page paper. Or I don't need to write a 10-page paper, I need to write a 5. This is just a ballpark. I have had great papers that came in at 4 pages, and I've had great papers that came in at 8. This is a ballpark, and I'm not going to penalize you just for not making it to exactly 4 pages. If it's a little bit under, don't worry about it. As long as you've complied and you've responded to the prompt, you should be fine. Also remember, Roswell papers are in MLA format. Now, I don't stand there with a gun and look for violations of MLA, but it's a way to make it readable and neat, and you should be familiar with it. And before I go into the nature of the paper, I just want to make one quick note. I encourage you to read this little section here as to plagiarism. Oftentimes, students will write a paper and then inadvertently, just by mistake, they forget to cite a source. Sometimes it's because a passage is so good or a sentence is so good they don't feel that they can replicate it, and so they just throw it in the paper and they hope that it won't matter. Or they think that perhaps even if they copy an exact sentence, it won't matter. Let me tell you, it will. The number one thing you need to be careful of when you're writing, particularly at the college level, is ensuring that you don't use someone else's work without citing them as a source. So let me give you an example. Suppose I have a sentence that I really like. There is absolutely no question that the debris from the ML307 is a radar reflector. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, hold on, I got a little troll talking to me. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's what you do. Let's say you've got a great sentence and you really want to use it. And let's say it's this one. There's absolutely no question that the debris is from an ML307 radar reflector. So here we're talking about some recovery, the recovery of some wreckage, and a picture taken of it just a day or two after this flying saucer was said to have crashed. And I just can't come up with any other way to say it apart from how Mr. Jeffrey did. Well, that's fine. What you do is you put quotes around their sentence. You identify it with quotes. Okay, so there's a quote there and there's a quote there, and then you cite it, right? Jeffrey 18. And then you will explain the quote. Don't expect the quote to do the work for you, but explain why you quoted it and why it was so important. So, for instance, I have here, concerning the physical evidence of the Roswell crash, quote, there is absolutely no question that this is debris from an ML307 radar reflector. And then you cite Jeffrey, right, Mr. Jeffrey, and then you add on. You don't just state that. You elaborate for the reader and you say, that is to say, the one objective piece of evidence that we have about the Roswell crash is that the debris was wholly terrestrial in origin. This is important because Marcel later changes his mind about blah, 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 and you go on. So don't worry about the content right here because you're not yet familiar with all the twists and turns in this case, but keep your mind on identify, cite, and explain, and that is icing it, right? So if you want to use someone else's words, just be cool, right? And ice their words. Identify them with quotes, cite the author, and then explain why you're using the quote. Okay, so let's very roughly get into what we're going to do here. This is a paper in which you will write 3 ACEs. So you're going to write an argument, right? You'll present an argument for the existence of aliens at Roswell, or you'll present a positive argument trying to establish that aliens landed in New Mexico in 1947. Then you will counter that argument, and then finally, when you're done with the argument and the counter argument, you will evaluate both points and tell me kind of where you end up. Now, the evaluation I'm not as worried about in the sense that you can go either way. Whatever you want to decide is great. Follow your reasoning. Wherever it leads you, that's where you go. But let me just give you, this is just a little example of what a paper might look like. you want to give me maybe a little bit of a roadmap paragraph just so that I know where you're going, right? So your first paragraph should give me your thesis statement. The aim of this paper is to apply reason in the determination of whether or not extraterrestrial aliens crashed in Roswell, New Mexico on or about July of 1947. I will consider 3 arguments, counter-arguments, and evaluations. Boom, and you're done. You don't need to be super fancy, and in fact, you can even almost entirely use my wording here. That would be perfectly fine. You don't need to do anything but start your paper with a thesis sentence right here. You don't need to start like a novel. Sometimes students do. They're taught to do that. But in this type of paper where we're expressly looking at arguments, we don't need to worry about setting the mood or providing a lead-in. Okay, so then try to think of each one of these letters, each one of these numbers as a paragraph in the paper. So this would be your first paragraph. And then your second paragraph, which presents your first argument, would read something like this. There are hundreds of eyewitnesses to the Roswell incident. Although these witnesses have some small discrepancy in details, they all overwhelmingly describe debris having blah, 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 blah. Okay, so you're saying, look, bunch of people saw this, so it must have happened, right? And then you present a counter-argument to that, and you might say something like, eyewitness testimony is wholly unreliable. Countless numbers of people have been wrongly convicted on the basis of eyewitness testimony. So here you talk about, sure, there's a lot of eyewitness testimony, but eyewitness testimony isn't very good proof, right? And then you give me your evaluation. The main issue here is whether or not the use of eyewitness testimony in a court of law is analogous enough to be proper standard for determining extraterrestrial Roswell claims. Okay, that's a lot of Greek. But the key insight in this particular sequence of arguments that I've just picked out of thin air is that if we were in a court of law, then you could call somebody to the witness stand. I've done this, right? And you interview them before the judge or the triers of fact. But we're not in a court of law when we're talking about Roswell. We're not trying to sue the government or anything here. Instead, we're trying to establish a claim. And remember, we have a rule in this course. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary, and you should have just said evidence out loud. In other words, remember, the crazier the claim, the more evidence we need to support it. This is a crazy claim, so we're going to need more than just eyewitness testimony. Maybe eyewitness testimony gives us some of the information we need, or gives us a place to start, but it can't prove the matter for us. And then you move on to your next one, right? The July 1947 FBI teletype memo clearly demonstrates that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now that's your format. So you're going to do argument. So you'll do a thesis statement first when you're writing your paper. The aim of this paper is da, 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 da. I'm quite comfortable with you using this language or something pretty close to it. Then you'll write an argument, paragraph or two, consisting of an argument in favor of the claim that the Roswell crash was due to extraterrestrials, or something like that. Then you'll do a counter-argument responding to that one, and then you'll do an evaluation. So you do A, C, E, and then, boom, you move on to your next argument. Then you do a counter-argument to that argument, and then you do an evaluation. Boom. Then you do your final argument, counter-argument, evaluation, boom. So you essentially have 3 aces. You go argument, counter-argument, evaluation. Then you do argument, counter-argument, evaluation, argument, counter-argument, evaluation, and you're done with the paper. So this is not a paper where you have to tie in all these threads. You essentially have 3 exercises to do here. You do your thesis statement, roadmap, and then argument, counter-argument, evaluation, argument, counter-argument, evaluation, and then argument, counter-argument, evaluation, and you're done. Now, where are you going to get all these arguments and all these counter-arguments and stuff? You're going to get it right here from the reading packet. So the first source I've produced for you here is ufoevidence.org, which is such a fun site to go look through. If you're interested in this kind of thing, it's so fun to look through these reports. Some of them are just downright creepy. This is a a more pro-extraterrestrial source, right? Now, unfortunately, I couldn't deliver all of the pro-UFO sources because some of what we're doing in this class is really learning to argue, and people who are arguing about this are usually on one or the other camp. So I fully disclose that these are sources which themselves were probably, they're slanted, they're more skeptical. So try not to let that flood your own worldview, right? Decide for yourself. But this gives you more material to write the paper. This is a super fun, super interesting article by Kent Jeffrey. Kent Jeffrey was one of the first researchers involved in Roswell and has some interesting ties to the case. Essentially, this is kind of his... it's his letter almost of resignation in the Roswell community that he used to be a believer, and for these reasons, he doesn't believe anymore. So that makes a really, really fun and interesting read just on its own. But it will help you to understand some of the background behind Roswell and some of the arguments for or against. So, for instance, he talks about UFO crashes and how, because they're so sophisticated, it seems like a crash would be unlikely for such a craft. And then he talks about certain documents and so forth. Then he talks about the 509th, which was the division of the base or division of the Army Air Force, which dropped the bomb on Japan, but also is said to have had a hand in moving this alien wreckage around. So he talks about those folks. It's a great article, and it goes on from there. Memory, communication, and perception, particularly strong and interesting points here regarding, what Jesse Marcel's son sees here, these beam patterns and so forth. Okay, so that's that. Probably the most meaty article you've got. And then I give you a skeptical take, but a different one, right? So this particular researcher is somebody who Roswell aficionados would know, right? Probably by sight. This is an article from something that used to be called SciScope, but essentially it's a skeptical acquirer. It's another skeptical source that I encourage you to look at because it will also give you some very good arguments, which then you can use to evaluate the case. Okay, so this packet is 34 pages long. I don't expect you to sit there and read every single word, but I do expect you to review the entire packet so that you can appreciate some of the connections that get made between the articles and you have enough material to do an ACE argument essay. Okay, you guys, I hope that is helpful. So again, simple format, argument, counter-argument, evaluation. You do all those one after the other, and then you move on. Argument, counter-argument, evaluation, and then the same thing. Your material is in the second reading packet. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please feel free. Don't hesitate to contact me.